Hello, my name is Dr. Wendy Stevens, and I am here to speak with you a little bit about the importance of making sure that you have a diverse range of representations in the literature that you use for language acquisition, literacy practice, and content area support in your classroom. I'm going to present a range of awards and designations that have been established so that hopefully you can connect your students with the best literature out there, as well as offering some rationales for why this is so critically important in today's multicultural society. So to start off, I wanted to begin with a metaphor that may be familiar to you, and that is one that was originated by Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop. She wrote a seminal article which is often referenced, which talks about the function of books for young people as being mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. Oftentimes when we work with a particular population in our school, we become sort of interested in this very first part of the metaphor, making sure that our students have books which respect their culture, reflect their lived experience, so that they can see themselves in the books that they have access to. Rudine Sims Bishop reminds us that it's very important that students also have windows onto other cultures. So even if your school is a relatively homogeneous demographic makeup, it's important to have a range of experiences represented in the books that you use with your students to normalize the multicultural society that they will be living in. And in addition to these two functions, she also advanced the idea that much reading can be aspirational, and she termed this the sliding glass door. That's providing students with glimpses of what their lives could be like as adults in particular occupations in other locales. And this is important because students can actually sort of step into the frame of these stories. In addition to these three really powerful metaphors, mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, and I think we can all think of books that we have read which functioned in all these roles for us as readers. There have been two metaphors that have emerged in the past few years that I think are interesting ways of conceptualizing multicultural children's literature. One of those is that these books can actually be fairly opaque, like curtains. And this is an idea that was suggested by Dr. Debbie Reese when she's writing about, as she often does, the depiction of Native people in children's literature. And she stresses that because of the historical hardships imposed upon many of the native populations in the United States through colonization and settlement, they might be reluctant to share their stories outside their community or to share them in a way that's immediately accessible to readers. So this is sort of another way that literature can function. And I think if you think about some folk tales that seem difficult for someone outside the culture to really grasp the fundamental importance of, this becomes a little bit clearer. Another function of literature, and this was Uma Krishnaswamy writing in the Hornbook, which is a journal for those interested in children's literature. She really discussed the possibility that multicultural representations could act as a prism, and in that way sort of complicate the view of the world that otherwise might be too simplistic. So rather than just reflecting back an experience, you're sort of adding additional dimensions and potentially coloring that experience in new ways. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, a lot of literature for children, it might include animal characters, or it might include high fantasy elements, and those are critically important because they help promote empathy in readers. Connections between different types of animals and different types of fantastic creatures demonstrate that cooperation is something that yields positive results, that conflict can exist amongst varieties of people and be worked out in a range of different ways. But reading really does promote empathy, and the more populations that you're able to introduce your students to via the world of literature, the more that they will realize that people have more similarities than differences, and that there are ways that we can find common ground and commonality to really assist each other and make our society more productive and help everyone in their own personal journey. Another important function of children's literature is that it helps promote agency, and multicultural literature in particular can provide ways in which children, especially those from disenfranchised groups, can see what is possible for them, ways that they can act in the broader world that might not be immediately apparent in their local community. So as you promote empathy and agency through a range of resources, you'll want to be sure that you select the best quality resources. And this can be really tricky. There are a number of complicating factors. One of those is that a lot of these books that are created by multicultural authors or include multicultural representations aren't necessarily described in that way in the bibliographic information associated with the books. Things that I really recommend that you bear in mind as you select diverse titles to work with young people. It's important that they be culturally authentic. And when I say that, I mean that that the community itself feels that this is something which is appropriate, and it's something that reflects the reality of life within their population or community. I think the best way to do this is to seek out titles which have won awards. By the time a book has won an award or appeared on a selection list, it's been through a pretty thorough vetting process. So a number of people have looked at it and sort of validated it as sort of the best that's out there. And every January there are a number of different ethnic organizations that, in addition to the Newbery and Caldecott Medal, designate titles for the best of children's literature. So we'll be talking some more about those. Now, those titles may also be represented on your Newbery and Caldecott lists as well. I'm thinking about Mercy Suarez Changes Gears, which was by Meg Medina and is very much the story of a girl who lives within a warm, loving Hispanic household with lots of specific Latinx details. And it's also important that you look for representations that are up to date. And I don't mean that you can't use historical accounts and you can't use biographies, but it's important that you balance those with things that are going to be a little bit more reflective of the range of realities today. And so what do you want to avoid? And I've heard this first point described as the familia, fiesta, and food shortcut for culture. You want to avoid things that really just enumerate the differences between cultures, or that really emphasize just specific aspects of the experience that don't really deal with characters as much as they do bits of culture that might differ from your own. It's also important to look beyond historical representations, as I mentioned earlier. That, especially if you're teaching a continuity class, can be very important, but everything should be contextualized, and especially with younger readers, emphasize that, things are not maybe the same as they were when a particular book took place. Also, you want to push beyond biography, and so this is, you don't want to have, a specific month where you look at a specific culture. It really needs to be diffused amongst the curriculum all year long, and you want to avoid assignments where you say you assign every student in the class an African American to study their biography. It's much more authentic to have them study scientists and be sure that you include sort of a range of backgrounds for the scientists that they're studying. So probably the best known award for multicultural literature is the Coretta Scott King Award, and I wanted to include their 50th anniversary graphic to really emphasize the fact that many of these books, this award has been around for a while, many of them now are historical representations. And, again, if you choose to use those with young people, make sure that you clearly explain that, this is what's going on now. I know that there are many teachers that love books by Mildred Taylor, who wrote really compellingly about farmers during the Depression, but you want to avoid giving the impression that this is, a reality that's going on now. So this award is actually designated in several categories, including author, illustrator, and the Step 2 Award for New Talent, which is not necessarily a debut book, but it sort of get granted to someone who has a body of work. So the author and illustrator are designated for specific books. The Step 2 Award is a little bit more inclusive. And the Virginia Hamilton Lifetime Achievement Award every other year is given to an author. In the odd years, it's given to a practitioner. So there's sort of a range of titles that could potentially be designated as Coretta Scott King Award books. And like I said, it's definitely the best known of the awards for diversity in children's literature. In addition to Coretta Scott King, Pura Belpré now has been around for a little over 15 years, and this award is named after a really famous Latina librarian who was known for really interactive puppet shows with young people. And it does look for representations of Latino and Latina experience, and that may be sort of a secondary character. It may be the author is of that designation, but there are really sort of a wonderful range of books that have been recognized, though it's much newer than the Coretta Scott King, so the backlist is not quite as long. The American Indian Youth Literature Award is one that I highly recommend because of the attention that it does pay to representations and cultural authenticities between the American Indian community, and specifically representing specific tribes and their history and culture. So rather than lumping all Native Americans together, it really pays attention to tribal affiliations. And they also have an adult literature award as well. The Asian Pacific Library Association, this is one that is relatively newer as well, and it just recognizes a range of books that have been authored by people of variety of Asian descents, and that may be everything from Middle Eastern to subcontinental Asia to the Far East. So if you're looking for sort of naturalistic ways to expand your collection and really reflect the lived existence of the many Asian Americans in the U.S., this is a really a strong list. The Sidney Taylor Award, this is named after the author of The All of a Kind Family, if you remember. It's sort of an older book, but it's presented by the Association of Jewish Libraries, and it specifically looks for representations of Jewish characters. So rather than the authors necessarily being Jewish, it looks for representations of Jewish life that are authentic and really represent sort of the range of Jewish experience, and I think that the range of titles that they've selected does that very well. If you're looking for books that are really from another culture, the Mildred Batchelder Award is given for books which are in translation. And it's kind of a complex award because the books have to have been published outside the United States first. And then it's actually an award for publishers recognizing their efforts in bringing international literature into the United States. This is an award that some years has not been given because they really feel that there has not been quality children's literature. They did make a shift in this award eligibility this past year. Before then, folk tales were not considered to be eligible, and now they are. So it'll be interesting to see if more traditional literature is included now that it's eligible for this award for books in translation. And another award that I wanted to be sure that I mentioned is the Snyder Family Book Award. And this award is not necessarily for multiculturalism, but it definitely reflects an element of diversity. And that's the disability experience in books. And this can range from everything from mental health issues to physical disabilities to intellectual disabilities. And these can be secondary characters as well as central to the plot. So you may notice that the seal itself actually has Braille to reinforce the inclusive nature of this award. If you have a student who's suffering with a particular issue, this would be a great thing to bring into your classroom to build empathy and really help get at that experience. And even if you don't, it's really a valuable resource to know about to help promote an inclusive classroom environment. The other book list, and this is the last one I wanted to discuss, is the Outstanding International Books list, which is put together every year by the United States Board on Books for Young People. And this includes books that are published in English-speaking countries outside the United States. So Canadian, English, Irish, Australian books are all eligible for this. And it really looks, again, at authentic representations. One thing I really like about this award is the fact that every year, and they recognize sometimes between 30 and 40 books, all of the books are mapped to the country where they're set. That might not be the country where they were published, but this really enables you to find some really culturally representative books from countries that you might not otherwise think that literature would be available from. So if you're doing a study of a specific area, you can go to the USBBY website and look for the Outstanding International Books and really find something that is going to be resonant and is going to represent that culture. And as I emphasize, these books are, from these cultures. Occasionally it'll be an author will have moved to another country, and that'll be represented on the list as well. So some suggestions for using multicultural literature. I think the most critical thing is to plan ahead. Many of these books can be difficult to obtain or access. Your librarian may not buy them as a matter of course, maybe with the exception of the Coretta Scott King books. You can sign up for Epic, which is a database which offers ebooks that are free for teachers to use in their classroom. I've heard the founder of this database speak recently, and he's really sort of on a mission to include the number of international titles that are included. There are many Batchelder winners that are now present there. Critically, and I've emphasized this before, provide context. It's a great idea to have a world map and a globe in your classroom anyway, but do show your students where these countries originate using those tools. When you're talking about things which did happen in the past, sometimes it can be helpful to provide some contemporary context and say, well, this was right after the Civil War, and talk about what that means, or this was during the Depression, and just to sort of situate that within the timeline that the students are familiar with. And also, if you do run across a problematic representation in a book that you're reading, take time out to discuss it and really, explain to your students why you might not use a particular construction or a particular word, or if it is used, why it's used, when and how it is. So there's sort of a range of things that you can think about. Again, your librarian can help you identify these books. I'm sure they'll welcome any recommendations you have if you know that you're going to be studying particular areas of the world or a particular author and you want to expand beyond her or his work and look at things which were contemporary but maybe from other cultures. Just plan ahead and let your librarian know sort of as early in the school year as possible that you're interested in these materials. Encourage your students to read diverse titles for independent reading. Don't match them up with authors or protagonists that are those mirrors for they themselves. That can be important when students are beginning reading, but as they develop their confidence and their fluency in particular, have them read about things which are not necessarily like themselves. You can really normalize diversity by including a range of different types of representations as you read aloud to students, and if you have a classroom library there. In literature circles, you might want to make an effort to make sure that there's sort of a range of authorship and protagonist represented. And also, importantly, really model about reading things that are not like yourself. So as you do that, you'll notice that your students will take their cues from you. As you are a reader, they will be a reader. So we live in this interconnected, global, multicultural society. No matter where we are, we're going to have to deal with people from different backgrounds. And it's important that we inform ourselves as much as possible about the range of lifestyles and cultures and everything that goes with that. Literature is a wonderful tool for doing that. And remember, mirrors, windows, sliding glass doors, curtains, prisms. Students are going to need all of those as they learn to be successful readers, writers, and learners. Thank you.